Hey guys, thank you all so much for coming. I feel like our guest today needs little introduction, but I'm going to give her a short one anyway. So Bonnie Wright is a British actress, obviously, most famous for playing Ginny Weasley in Harry Potter, but she's also worked on a number of other projects, including modelling, screenwriting, and she's starting with some directing with a short film, Medusa's Ankles. So please can we have a round of applause for Bonnie? Sure.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Wow, I just wanted to say a big thanks, firstly, to the union for inviting me here today. It's pretty overwhelming to be in such an academic environment. I definitely was not, I never considered academia as my strength when I was younger, and even now I definitely comprehend the world more in images. I thought I would just say a little bit before we go into the discussion. Before we talk about my work as an actress and a director, and also my sort of interest in single-use plastics and my work that I've been doing with Greenpeace. When I went to university, I studied directing and writing at University of the Arts London. And since graduating from there, I've learned really a lot about my creative practice and as an artist, and really realized how much discipline there is, which I'm sure you all understand as students, and how much more solitude I've ended up finding in the work of filmmaking, even though it's an incredibly collaborative process. So I'd love to talk a bit about that and how I've learned to sort of set goals and boundaries within my work in order to sort of keep the discipline going with creating and producing work. And obviously I'd love to talk about my experience in Harry Potter. It really was, an incredible 10 years of my life that I learned a great deal about the industry, and really it just began my love and respect for the amount of craftsmanship that goes into filmmaking, and the meticulous detail that went into the storytelling of those films. It was very unique by comparison to other filmmaking that I've experienced. And yeah, a lot about collaboration and how so many of the crew members gave me time and showed me, what certain things did on film sets, because I was so curious during that 10 years. And how that led me to direct myself. And I was going to show you 3 clips of my work so you had a bit of context. So the first clip is my graduation film that I made in 2012 that I took to Cannes Film Festival, and it's called Separate We Come, Separate We Go. And then the next clip will be from a music video I made last year, for an artist called Sophie Lowe, and that's called Taught You How to Feel. And then the final clip is from a project you mentioned, which is a short film called Medusa's Ankles that was an adaptation of A.S. Byatt's short story of the same title that came out on the BBC last year. So let's have a watch.
Where would it be?
I can't be anywhere. This is it.
Yeah, but you wanted to come here. You chose to come here, and so you came. So, what's next?
Paris?
Great choice. That's lovely. Okay. So, which way is Paris?
I don't know.
Well, there's the sea, and we're in the bottom right-hand corner of England, and the sea connects us to France. So,
That way?
see, you did it. You just followed your instinct. Never think too much; it'll destroy you. Look, 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 look. Here they come. Here they come. Right. Now let's shout and tell them where to go. Come on.
Fly!
Fly! To Paris! Fly to Paris!
Paris!
Fly! Fly! Fly to Paris! Fly to Paris! That's why I love this place.
What's your name?
Norman.
Mine is Thea.
Well, Thea, it's been a pleasure. It's getting dark soon. Your mother will be missing you.
She will. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Dear Norman, if I had wings, I'd fly to Paris every day. The boy at school told me he will sail there in a frying pan because it would keep him warm. I'd like to see the birds again. I miss Dungeness. See you soon. Thea.
Nice. It's hideous!
Honestly, in my opinion, it looks really great. She's done a nice job. She's lifted it a bit, but that's how everyone wears it nowadays. It is really nice.
It is horrible! I look like a middle-aged woman with a bad hairdo. Not natural?
I'll get Deirdre to tone it down a
I
bit.
don't want it toned down! I want my real hair back!
Okay, just calm down.
Get back!
Don't get excited.
Get back!
Will you calm down? Insurance will pay for everything.
I think I better go.
Fantastic. So my first question was going to be about fun anecdotes on the set of Harry Potter, which now seems like a bit of a mood whiplash after that last clip. But I was wondering, are there any moments from the 10 years you spent on the set that particularly stand out to you?
It's pretty hard to condense 10 years into a moment. I think it changes all the time as I recall certain elements. I would say, I always felt so lucky to be part of the Weasley family. Not only was I, at Hogwarts as a student and I had all those incredible scenes, but I also had this additional sort of extra family and world that I loved being a part of. And Julie Walters, who played my mum, Mrs. Weasley, was always such a real mother to me, and I really looked up to her, and the older I got, the more I realized, the kind of amazing career that she had had. So I think, many of those moments, my most kind of special, were on the set of the Burrows, the Weasley house.
Oh, that's really sweet. And you mentioned that the Harry Potter was quite a different filming experience to the other films you've had. Like, what made it so different? Was it just the kind of once in a generation, like making people's childhoods? Or?
I think it was just the scale in which they were made at. I mean, to sort of give you a bit of an idea, if a day went wrong, it would cost like $1 million for the whole production of one day of filming. So just,
wow.
I think in that sense of like so much material, so many bodies of people were there, making each sort of moment how it was. And I think it was that made it special. I mean, we were already, working with such incredible material in the sense that, the world that Joe Rowling wrote had such depth and layers that I think most of the people, such as Stuart Craig, who was the production designer, or all of the directors that came on board, they had so much to play with and work with, and I think that's just that has made people kind of revisit the film so much. There's always kind of a corridor that you maybe didn't sort of see or go down, and I think that's the same as what people find in the books.
Was that a lot of pressure, like as a child, knowing that a whole day would cost like $1 million, or did you not know?
I didn't know that. I think until like much later on. And I think even if someone told me that, I think I wouldn't even probably comprehend what that is and means, and I still don't think anyone can comprehend figures and numbers. But I feel like weirdly there wasn't like necessarily this pressure always to perform. I think, and I don't think that was just, it happened to be. I think that was a very sort of purposeful, sort of safe space that the producers kind of created for us all to sort of exist in. And I think I'm also super thankful really that it existed in a time where we didn't have Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts as like 13-year-old actors on these sets. We were, we were there in this kind of bubble in this world, and it really, in a weird way, it was a job, and we were there sort of doing what we could know how best to do. And it was never, this pressure. It was always really surreal. I mean, even if you had the premiere to the film and you came out at Leicester Square and you just saw the scale of people who'd been camping out there for days to be part of the experience, it like never got normal, that. And seeing yourself on screen is like a weird sort of thing. And I think also we were all doing it. We were in it together. I think it would be very different if you're like the only sort of young child actor on a set of adults, where we were like amongst each other and our contemporaries, and it did feel a bit more like a school or situation.
And I've always wondered, when you're filming like a film, obviously you don't film it all in order, when do you get this kind of sense that it's all coming together, or do you just kind of, arrive one day and think, what am I going to be doing?
Yeah, I guess you don't really, which is sort of why I was always really interested in my sort of what happened beyond my role. I think, from quite a young age, I was really interested in like why they built a wall a certain way, or why are they shooting that first, or why have they lit something to look a certain way that when you watch the film it didn't look anything like that. So I was always really interested in, I guess, how many moving parts there are,
like
and
the
like
technical aspects.
And really you don't really witness a lot of that from an acting perspective. You come in, you do your sort of part, and even there are so many scenes that if you're not in, you won't even witness them being filmed. So, but then, it was always exciting seeing it for the first time, and you see
definitely.
it all come together.
Definitely. And on the subject of child actors, like, how do you think your experience was different to child actors today? Do you think the world has changed so much for the worse for child actors, or do you think there are some ways in which it's better?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess I can only like understand it from my personal experience. And even in a way when people say, and they ask you how different your life was, we all only like have our own life experience. So it's sometimes like hard. I don't know what it's like for other people. I would say I'm kind of pleased in sort of, in retrospect, that I didn't have social media to maybe kind of get sort of lost in and understand like that it's often a projection of what people want to sort of put out there, whereas for younger people, I think you maybe don't see that difference. Although I feel like most young people navigating social media these days like are pretty savvy in understanding that. But I don't know. I think it's different, and I think maybe people now know more about what it might be like to be an actor or be on a film set, because I think that privacy that maybe happened, or just less interest in like behind the scenes, meant that maybe it was like understood less. Whereas I think now, if you want to maybe see what a film set looks like or understand what a day in the life of an actor on set is, I think you can like access that information.
And you see a lot of child actors like giving interviews to the press and stuff. Did you do a lot of that when you were working on the films?
We only really did press around the release of the film, so it was never sort of outside of that. So either it would be like press junkets or certain things that they would, choose certain publications that we'd sort of speak to.
Fair. And do you think it was your experience, like, asking about all these technical aspects on the Harry Potter film that really turned you towards directing in like, university and now?
Yeah, for sure. I think it was just everyone. I was also thankful that people like gave me time. I don't know if, I'm sure at some points I was probably annoying asking them like what buttons did the whole time. But yeah, I hope that, I believe that that's what it is that inspired me to continue working. And also in my, at the end of school, all my A-level subjects that I was doing were sort of showing to me that that was also what I was interested in. So whether or not it was the kind of books that I was interested in when studying English literature, or the type of photos I was taking in the photography A-level I did, or in my art A-level, all the work I was doing was all of it, film was the medium I chose to sort of express the story or idea I was kind of working through. So it was I think for so many people it is often like an accumulation of experience and interest that kind of present the subject you end up going to do, and that was what it was for me. But yeah, I think I was just fascinated in the craftsmanship that went into filmmaking and the integrity behind that. And I sort of I also knew that I wanted to study and be with my contemporaries making films. Obviously, I had a bit of a back to front way of making things on this like crazy scale, and then going to university. And then, since graduating in 2012, I've, worked on a very small scale, slowly working up to, hopefully feature filmmaking. So I'm pleased that I've given myself time to sort of, make mistakes and kind of experiment with it. Really.
Yeah, and develop, absolutely. So do you prefer directing to acting, do you think? Or is that a hard choice? I guess they all have their different pressures and...
Yeah, they both inform one another, for sure. At this minute in time, I definitely respond more to directing. I'm kind of much... Even though I'm speaking to you now, I'm actually way happier behind a camera, and I think, I feel like I've had more of a space to express myself and more of a space to sort of tell my own stories. And it's just a little bit more sort of hands-on, and you're at the project from its conception through the development of it, pre-production, the shoot, the post-production, the sort of the life of it kind of ending up on screen. You're just
see the whole thing.
There's just more to it for me personally, but who knows? Maybe I'll, once I get the hang of it, maybe direct myself in something. I don't know, but they're very similar. I've learned obviously a lot from having been directed. It's meant that when I'm directing actors, it's like my most comfortable space. Whereas I know for other friends of mine who are also directors, maybe their comfortable space is, lenses and cameras, yet actors and speaking to actors is their kind of terror. Where for me, that is one comfortable space for me.
How do you make the jump between, like, as a director, I assume you have to kind of have a holistic view of where you want the film to go, but also be really focused on the details of each scene? Like, how do you keep that all in your head?
Yeah, it's hard. I think sometimes you can catch yourself getting way too into like how this glass is placed on this table and the light is shining on it.
It's not a big deal, really.
You're like, okay, we need to move on, and you have to kind of know how much you need to get shot in that day. You need this balance of patience and time management, and also I think what you need to be good at is it is a collaborative process, so you need to listen to your collaborators in order for them to put in sort of fresh energy into the work, but you also need to know when to make the decision and be a director and say, that's a great idea, but actually I think we should do this, or stand up for yourself. Sometimes you end up having to. So it's always a kind of push and pull. And I think quite laterally anyway, so sort of imagining my whole set and everything that goes around it is something that that kind of comes to me
quite easily.
Yeah.
And how do you manage not to with artistic discipline? It's kind of not a thing that people think about, as in making yourself do art, making yourself set goals for yourself and doing art, because people think of it as quite a conceptual thing. How do you do that? How do you
Yeah, I think with all things, it's you don't have to be doing it. I think that's the first thing. It's I think it's I'm very understanding of the sense that I have freedom to be able to give myself time to, find the idea I want to do. And I think, nothing needs to be, there's obviously enough stories and movies and books out there, but it's for me, I do it because it's a space that I process how I'm processing life and understanding life, and I use my sort of film work to process the questions I'm questioning. So like for my next film, it's very much pulls in my interest in sustainability and the environment and sort of pollution, and I'm using my film work and the fictional space to sort of explore my kind of questions of that, my worries of that issue, and I use the film to sort of process what I feel about that topic.
So the way you would kind of set goals is be like, I will have completed this goal once I've processed what I think about a certain issue?
Kind of, and you know, maybe it will, and maybe, you know, one sort of story character idea ends up being something you process through 10 films or one film, or, you know, even sometimes a film you have the idea for but you never end up making.
Have you had anything like that? Something that's like either that's threaded through a load of films or maybe just not made it onto screen?
Yeah, I feel like without knowing it, I mean, or maybe not without knowing it, but with knowing it, there's definitely like a through line of sort of narrative that's been going through my work, which I think is the same for most artists. Is always kind of something that kind of threads through whether or not you change your opinion of it in that processing. But I think in terms of how it's done or setting goals, I think, you know, the quicker you realize it's about the process and not the outcome, then the more enjoyable being an artist is. And I think unless you're interested in the process, it's not really the right industry to be in or field or practice to be in, because often the outcome can feel quite strange and bizarre and out of body.
Once you've dedicated thousands of hours to it.
Yeah, and you can finish a film, you show it, and you can sometimes feel nothing. You know, it's you don't, and then other times it will take a few months or a year to rewatch that piece of work and for it to settle and realize what it was or how you feel about it. And that was kind of weirdly what happened for me, and I think for a lot of other people when we finished the Harry Potter films. In the moment of finishing it, it was kind of surreal and bizarre, and it sort of made sense in a way, but it wasn't really till a few years afterwards in the process of reflection did I really understand what the whole thing was and how, you know, instrumental it was in what I ended up doing, and I think it just became almost bigger. When I finished it, the impact it had was bigger than it was when it was happening, in a way.
Absolutely, it's definitely shaped a generation. So this narrative that runs through your work, what is it? Can you give us an overview, or is it still something that you're like working on?
I guess, I mean, I've always been most of my films, I guess actually only one of the ones you watched there but most of them are usually in sort of more rural, natural landscapes. And it's often, you know, a space that I kind of utilize for my character to sort of go to in order to sort of find new perspective in what they're dealing with. So, you know, the young girl that we saw in the film just now, she sort of leaves her sort of quite bleak domestic environment with her mother, who's severely depressed, and she leaves her home to walk to this kind of nearby place called Dungeness, which is a real place in Kent. And she walks there and sort of meets this guy who lives there and is there kind of processing his own grief. And in the moment of just being in that new, much more open, physically open space and having that kind of release of that sort of fun, weird moment of just like chasing the birds and just like being present, it enables her to sort of escape the quite heavy domestic space she's in. And then even then using kind of more cityscapes, in the sense that the bus journey that Sophie is on in the music video. Yeah, that kind of that movement and being in that space. And then at the end of the music video, essentially she gets off the bus and we're in this like super high up kind of drone shot of her like walking off the bus, and there's a completely new kind of space, and she lets go of the sort of guy that, the creepy guy. And then in Medusa's ankle, she quite literally smashes the space she's in. So at the beginning of that film, it's this sort of pink, soft, beautiful space that she walks into, this woman who never has cared much about her appearance. She sort of finally decides to step into a hairdresser's and sort of be taken under the wing of this hairdresser that's played by Jason Isaacs that you saw. And And then one day she comes back and the whole space has been changed into this very sterile, gray, heavily lit space. And suddenly her sort of aging process is put under a magnifying glass and she just crunches under it and she then just explodes. So often, it's using the physical environment, whether or not that's a big expansive rural space or whether it is that hairdressers. I'm just always interested in how spatially we're affected by the room we're sitting in and how...
Like the chamber.
Yes. And how, as a director, you can sort of just draw upon it as a kind of tool to sort of
Convey.
And I think, again, it's like those boundaries are really interesting and that's what I really understand a lot as directing too. I think when you're working and collaborating with people, whether or not it's your cinematographer or your actor, you're always kind of setting these boundaries to then like play within. And I think if you don't set boundaries when you're making a film, and obviously each film there's different boundaries you're making, I think there's almost like too much freedom.
Yeah.
And you kind of get lost and you don't know what to do. So I'm interested in that too, like my own boundaries that I'll set for myself.
Yeah.
Within a story or within a set.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what...
So obviously art's like a deeply personal process. Like, how much of yourself do you put into your films, and do you ever worry that like you're putting more of yourself in there than you feel like comfortable with? You know, it must be quite raw being exposed. At, like,
I
a film
think
festival.
so. I mean, I think to be vulnerable for anything is always definitely a challenge, but I think it's the most interesting. I think people are always drawn to that because I think when you see someone being vulnerable, and I think if you see an actor as well being vulnerable, it for me, when I'm watching even other people's work, I get a lot of like almost like a rush of adrenaline when I see someone else being vulnerable because you kind of get this weird strength. I think
empathy,
from other people.
yeah,
and I think you respond to it because there's so many walls in front of everything, and when there's suddenly not one, and you properly see someone, that transparency is just really interesting. I think for me, sometimes I think I make work and I don't think I've put much of myself in it, and then I watch it or someone else comments on it, and I realize that it's more me than I realize. But I hope to continue to always. Even I think as well, so for something like the Medusa's Ankles, that was an adaptation of A.S. Byatt's work. That was the first time I'd ever directed something that I hadn't written. I mean, I wrote the script adaptation, but it was the first time I had made something that wasn't my first initial idea. And that was a really interesting experience because you're like, okay, how and what am I going to put in of myself? And how much do I want to respect her work as an author? Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen to sort of make the story if I didn't love what she already presented in her work. So that was really interesting and much more challenging than I thought. Because, you're trying to still, put a part of you and interpret it as well. And the project that I'm working on now, which will be my first feature film, is I'm collaborating with 2 other writers on it, and it was my original sort of concept, but that we then developed it between the 3 of us over the last 8 months, and then they're physically writing it. So we just kind of finished that draft of the script, and like I said, that's the script that kind of pulls in my kind of interest in pollution and single-use plastics and the environment into that said story.
Yeah. So moving on to your environmental work, what do you think's been the best, the most shocking revelation that you've heard about the extent of the environmental crisis we've heard? What made you want to get into this as your area of activism?
Yeah, I think what made me get into it is just really seeing a space for me to, whether or not that's changed my own sort of consumption habits or whether or not it's pushing certain policies or governments or corporations. I really believe that it's something that we can actually sort of, if we use our sort of tools wisely and each other wisely, we can actually, stop certain things or hopefully address certain things where other issues, I think often we can be quite paralyzed in how much we can help. Whereas this is something that I've found just in the simple lifestyle choices that I've tried to change to reduce my sort of consumption and reliance on single-use plastics. I feel, even in my own small way, that there is sort of some power to that, in that. And in terms of most shocking, It's funny, I think the most shocking thing is when you're not shocked by the shocking thing. I think we all now see so many, images or viral videos that go around of just like seas of plastics, all these like trash islands that have just, been created. And I'm most shocked when I feel accustomed to those images. And I think that's when you think, how can we tell this story differently to, fast track what we're doing and make this being put on the top of our agenda, because I think this is going to, not only this, but, climate change in general, it's going to trickle through all elements of our life. And I think for me, what I've learned during the process of it is that I think the story is best told when we realize that, it's not, marine life deep, far out in the ocean that we can't even see that's going to only be affected. But this all goes back to us. We are of nature as much as, a whale that's, right out in the ocean that we will never, ever witness. We are of it too. And I think once the story is told in that way, that this is all part of one kind of big cycle and everything's connected. And I think that's what I've understood in the kind of consumption habits and changing the way that I try and interact with this kind of single-use stuff. I think it is, again, just stems back to like the interrelatedness of everything and how, I hope that we can try and begin to sort of like head towards a more, circular economy, in the sense that everything is quite linear. We think of things in a, we kind of don't take responsibility for something that we interact with. And I think that's not any fault. I think it's just how we've ended up being in a quite conveniently sort of consumer way. Not that I think, I don't want to not be a consumer, but I think it's just like thinking differently.
Yeah. And obviously art has a long history of being used like politically, like in the HIV and the AIDS crisis. Do you think of your art, like the film that's coming out, as political in any way?
Yeah, I hope it will be. I think the beauty of art is it's sort of, you have the artistic license to sort of, maybe bend the facts and truth to kind of really hit hard on the topic you're wanting to explore. I think, for instance, for this film, it's not a kind of serious drama. It's essentially like a thriller monster movie. So I'm using genre to, really explore the topic and to push the boundary further to show this may seem crazy and wild and like it won't happen, but it could. Yeah. And for me, that's fun because it allows me a bit of freedom and a playfulness around a very heavy subject. And I hope that, it's maybe more digestible for people who don't want to read the kind of terrifying facts and see the images. I think it's more of an entertaining space that we still, love. We all, I think, the escapism of going to the cinema, I think, is something that in times that can feel quite bleak and overwhelming, cinema has always been a space that people have continued to go to. So yeah, I hope it will be political.
Do you think that's like the place of art within like political movements, like pushing the boundaries and getting emotional reactions beyond like the statistics that often we can't comprehend because they're just so huge?
Yeah, I think it's a choice of what kind of film you want to make. I think either you're going there and you're challenging certain issues of that time, or you're deciding to do the opposite and actually allow people a moment of just pure escapism from the reality of that. So, but I think it's always so reflective, of how much, to me it feels like at the moment television is just very violent, and it's always interesting thinking what's leading us to want to watch quite violent stories, and how is that reflective of like the time we're in? Is it some sort of like weird cathartic release that we need in the sort of intensity of what we're going through? It's always interesting, like the patterns of how that works and why we're sort of led to certain genres.
I remember reading something about how like zombie films gain in popularity whenever people like fear like a domestic crisis. Is this ever something that you'd like thought about in film school, or something you think is happening now?
Yeah, definitely. And I think always, just even the research that's gone into certain, other sort of monster kind of films, or sort of apocalyptic films, or films that are about kind of climate in some way. There's it's always interesting the representation that certain characters will take and how reflective that is. And yeah, I mean, it was definitely something, although I think there are some things that have always been, I feel like that's what's interesting, I feel about like horror. It's always been a genre that's always been continually successful in a strange way, and I think that's kind of...
But in different ways, I guess.
Yeah, in different ways and different representations of different characters, but yeah, it's definitely reflective.
Yeah. So a couple more questions before I open it up to you guys. If films are reflective of their time and like Harry Potter shaped a generation, what do you think it says about the time it was created, and I guess the childhoods of pretty much everybody in this room?
I think to me what, you know, reading those stories was, and even being a part of the filmmaking process was, you know, for Harry, obviously he had no family, and obviously Hogwarts becomes that.
Family,
all the people that kind of welcome him in and show him that, like, he is something and he is accountable. Obviously he is something greater than probably a lot of those students, but I think it was just being seen. I think that's what that film, I mean, the books were to me. You realize, like, oh, he, you know, for a kid who is, you know, is spent his entire life under the staircase in a cupboard, and suddenly he's seen by these friends that give him loyalty and a sense of belonging and a family. I think that's what those stories I felt were for me, and I feel like when I speak to people, that's very much what they were too. And yeah, I think it was that, really, to have friendships and to know the importance of that, I think.
Is the overwhelming message.
I mean, I think for everyone, there was always a different angle. I mean, that was the beauty of them. People might be like, oh my God, it was this. Or I mean, I meet a lot of people who, you know, are very open about how much they were bullied at school, or on how Harry Potter was such a sanctuary for them, to whether or not it was for them in solitude as a sanctuary away from their situation, or actually it was the stories and the friendships that made them realize the importance of participating in, you know, their school environment, even under their circumstances. So I think that's what it's been interesting to hear from other people, but I'm sure you all have like your own thing that it brought you. But yeah, I think it was just a home to go to, and I think people, you know,
that's
still
you endured. Yeah. Fantastic. And on that note, I think we'll open it up to the floor. So does anybody have any questions? I'm at the front here. A microphone will come to you from the back or the front. In the grey, stripy. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm Zoe from Darwin College. I'm kind of interested in the transition phase between your life as a Harry Potter actress and the rest of your life. And I imagine that there must have been a lot of expectations on you about what you would do next. Did you feel that pressure at the time? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I definitely did feel some kind of pressure, I think. Often probably just pressure on myself, from myself. I think it was more just, you know, I think I was so lucky to find myself in that experience at an age where I probably didn't even sort of have any idea of what I wanted to be or do. And I think for me, the transition was really figuring out like what I wanted to do from entirely just my own kind of space. Not that it was never not a choice for me to be part of those films, but I think it was like just re-understanding and re-establishing like what my drives were and what I wanted to do and say, like individually from such a huge sort of machine that the films kind of were. And I think also, you know, I went to university, and then I feel like similar to most people, you graduate and you have this kind of weird time where you've been jumping through all these loops of, you know, what you've got to do, and you've got to get this mark, and you've got to go to this, you know, you're all familiar with what I'm saying, but you then have this time when you think, oh, wait a minute, like, no one's telling me what I should be doing, no one's giving me a deadline to hand something in. You know, what's my deadline? What am I working towards? Was this kind of space? And during that time when I graduated, I was acting and directing still. I guess, yeah, more acting in the work sense. And I was like, how do I navigate this? And I realized there was a moment that I was like, okay, if I'm really going to follow this directing path, do I just need to focus on that to then see even if it is what I want to do, rather than kind of doing both. It was challenging. I feel like it takes a lifetime of kind of time to do each, and to try do them at the same time was difficult. So it was really the moment where I was like, okay, I'm just going to try directing and just focus on that and see if that is what suits and what fits. And when I did that, it just felt so right, and it just, you know, my work and ideas seemed to flow when I just sort of put one thing to bed for the moment. And so, yeah, I think it took me a while, though. I think it wasn't for like a few years till after I graduated, I feel like I really got into the flow. Or I think sometimes it's saying to yourself, even if you studied something, to like say that to have the confidence to say that you are something also can take a while, to be like, oh yeah, I am a director, or that is what I'm going to say I am now, is like something that takes a while to own. And so it was definitely not till like way after I graduated did that really happen as a transition.
Fantastic. At the front in the pink.
As a director, I feel like you'd be the best person to ask. Which movies would you recommend?
Oh, that's hard. I feel like I've gone through so many. When I was at film school, it was like very European heavy, very sort of like French New Wave and things like Cassavetes and Truffaut and people like that. And then since I've finished, or even more now, I've been much more interested in more kind of, I guess in relation to the monster thing, more like sci-fi apocalyptic films. God, it's hard. I mean, I would start with silent cinema in a weird way. I think it just shows you what you can tell in that space, and then like slowly, like start right at the beginning. I mean, like the Lumiere brothers are really interesting. The really early sort of silent cinema that they made, to me, show like the magic of cinema and really like just the imagery of cinema before you bring in sort of, you know, spoken word and dialogue, I would say, as like an interesting space to start in. So that's like, yeah, right back to the Lumiere brothers.
Fantastic. Well, last one at the front, then I promise I'll stop neglecting this side of the room.
Thanks for coming, Wright. So you mentioned that people go to the cinema to escape reality, and you as an actress and a director with years of experience, do you think you can still kind of escape, or when you watch a movie, do you automatically like think of the how can I do this, or like the technical aspects?
I would definitely say I watch things with that in mind, with this like constantly sort of analyzing things or thinking like how did they achieve that thing, you know, that scene. But I think I'm still so taken by the story. I think I'm still like I think everyone wants to have their, you know, we want to be taken into a world. Like I think we want to sort of not be tricked into something, but that's like suspension of disbelief. I think you want to be taken to this world, and you want to sort of really believe that you're in this space with these characters. And I'm always really impressed and pleased that like that is still the more deciding, like prominent sort of way that I go, and maybe more like analyze it afterwards. But it depends. I think you can also just be in a more analytical like mood sometimes. You know, I'm sure it's the same for you as well. You know, I think you can be reading something that you have to be reading, so you're analyzing in a different way, and then you're watching something because you just like stumbled across it, then you're going to just like digest it differently. But I think you're always thinking things technically. Or it's interesting as well, I think, from a learning sort of, in terms, if you want to sort of understand more about cinema, it's almost interesting sometimes to choose one film and to watch it quite a few different times, but focusing on different elements. So you could start by watching just be focusing on the cinematography, and then you watch it again, you're just focusing on the editing, and then another time you're just focusing on the performances and, you know, all the other disciplines. I think it's a really interesting kind of exercise to give yourself, because I think it just shows how differently you can miss things and how differently you can like respect how it's been told. Yeah, thanks.
I see anybody over this side of the room, at the back in the orange?
Hiya. I'm sure it hasn't escaped you over the years, and I'm sorry to ask about Harry Potter because I don't want to reduce all the wonderful things you've done just to, oh, you're in Harry Potter, but I'm sure you know that there's been a discussion about like book Ginny versus film Ginny. And as I got older and sort of rewatched the films again and reread the books, I thought that, because I do think there is quite a big difference between them, and I thought that the problem, and I would say problem, lay in the writing and directing of Ginny and nothing to do with your performance. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, and if you, at any point, thought that Ginny was being written for the films in a much more vanilla and sort of submissive almost way than she's in the books, or not.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with you. I think I would agree with you in the sense that I think the most important thing to think is that in filmmaking, it's always working to like a narrative model of a hero's journey, and the hero was Harry Potter. So in order to best tell the story of the hero, there was a lot of things that had to be cut in the filmmaking process. And I think we all wish that there was like 5-hour-long films of each installment, so we got to see so many different parts of all the different characters. And I would agree. I mean, I think, realizing and understanding why Ginny and Harry end up together has so much more depth and sense in the books. And I think, for the moments that I was able to show this kind of what I sort of understood as her as this kind of quite fierce and like warrior-like character. She's a tomboy and she has all these, older brothers, and she's under this kind of interesting family dynamic and quietly kind of like goes on and bees her in a very, different sort of not overtly feminine way of a character. And I really loved that because I kind of understood it, being kind of tomboy myself and being a quieter girl than maybe other people were in my class. So I understood that element of Ginny, and I brought that myself. But I would say there were so many times where I wished there were I could have included many more of the scenes of her from the books in the films. And at the end of the day, everything's an interpretation, and that's what I kind of learned a lot as well, just adapting something myself. You are interpreting it, and I think you're working alongside different directors as well across the filmmaking process, and each of them are going to have different agendas of how they want to direct and tell the story as well. So it was an interesting keeping hold of a character for 10 years and working with different people with different kind of agendas was also interesting. So, and obviously as you've gone back and watched the films, I similarly have reflected on it, and I think it's interesting to see where and how and why there should have been more of her. Or I mean we're always going to have different interpretations, but yeah, I agree. I wish there had been more.
Any more questions? Anybody? Another one, go.
If you could play another role apart from Ginny in the Harry Potter series, which one would it be?
Well, after playing such a good character for 10 years, I always used to... there's absolutely no way that anyone could have done a more brilliant job than Helen Bonham Carter, but her role as Bellatrix Lestrange I always thought was so cool. Just her kind of physicality that she brought to that role. It was like every cell in her body was evil, and I thought it was just a really cool character that was so different to mine. And I also found all the sort of creatures and all those things really fascinating. Like a lot of the people that their performance was all captured by motion capture. That's always been a really interesting kind of thing that I would love to get into, and maybe hopefully will from a directing perspective. There's such a kind of choreography and dance to those kind of roles when the whole thing is physically recorded. So yeah, maybe some of those characters too.
Last chance, or I will ask. Oh, amazing.
So you talked a little bit about sticking with a character for 10 years, and that's such a unique experience. And I'm wondering if you have any desire to do that from a directing perspective, to stick with a story for a long period of time.
Yeah. I guess it's either, you wonder if it either comes from just, it happens to be that you focus on a story, as we were saying, for a long period of time, or you actually go in actively wanting to make a series, or, that's always been, for me, I've never done any I mean, I did once a web series, even though there were like 3 episodes. It was an anthology in the sense that they didn't, the stories weren't connected. So I've always been interested in how differently that form of storytelling is. I don't know whether that is more likely now to exist in the format of television. And I think, to me, that must just be totally different in terms of, I mean, even now, like going from short form to feature length, how different, it's like you're speaking a different language in a way, you're working with a very different like structure. So it'd be interesting to sort of work with that space. I don't know if I'd openly, willingly commit to doing something for 10 years after doing something for 10 years. I also think the cool thing about, filming Harry Potter was that none of us really knew just how many years we were going to be doing it. That like, there was like a kind of the mystery of how it would unfold and how even would our characters like live through the story. They were being written as we were making them. So like the mystery in it made it sort of more sort of exciting and probably easy because we weren't like constantly projecting like, oh, I know I'm going to be doing this for so long. So I'm not sure how like quickly I would jump to making something for 10 years, but who knows? Maybe I will.
So we're almost out of time, but we probably have time for 1 or 2 more. Over there again, in the grey.
I was wondering if you have already seen The Cursed Child in London, and if so, do you think it's kind of weird to like see someone else play the role you like played for 10 years?
Yeah, I have seen it, and it is strange. But I think with The Cursed Child, I think it's so the language is different. It's obviously not written by Joe Rowling, so I think there's instantly a different interpretation. So it already kind of has that sort of theme of kind of taking the story on and taking it somewhere else. So it was, for me, I found it a very liberating experience watching someone else interpret and take on this role that I knew so intimately. I found it just really fun. I could be an audience member, a spectator in the world of Harry Potter, and it was, I actually enjoyed it. And also it was just so different seeing something produced for theatre is just so different, and I found like the stage magic and everything they did on those sets was so unique to theatre, and it was really fun to see how differently that read as a story. So yeah, it was actually enjoyable watching someone else do it.
Over there in the blue? Yeah.
All right, so you've adapted an A.S. Byatt story. Would you say that there are any more stories that you particularly like to tell in the future?
It's interesting. I was reading this like, it's really bad. I don't remember the author's name. I think it was like I guess it's aimed at like kids to young adults, and it was called Plastic Girl. And my friend just gave it to me as my birthday gift because she saw it, and the girl had like red hair, and the title was Plastic Girl, and she was like, "You don't even know what this is, but you need to read it." And it's very much a story written for children or teenagers, and it's always been a space that I've been really interested to get into. I've always been really interested in just how much obviously power lies within the youth to get into story. I mean, already right now, I've been just so incredibly inspired by all of the strikes that have been going on, the student strikes for climate, and the one that's happening next week on the 15th of March. And I've been interested for a while to see how I could find maybe an existing story that has been written very much for children or young adults, and looking into that world. And I don't know whether or not that's adapting something or whether or not that's actually writing something original. But I would quite like to, get into a different sort of age group, really, just because I feel like there was so much more. I mean, that there's a kind of, not that I'm trying to make a story to like mold any young person's mind, but I think they're so open and receptive that I think you can, the boundaries that I was saying that I set myself in filmmaking, I feel like would just kind of explode because they're willing to go like everywhere and anywhere. And I think that sort of, that willingness is a really interesting space in storytelling. And whether or not maybe that just means playing more into a genre of fantasy or something like that to still navigate this topic of the environment, essentially. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I guess last question in the middle in the denim there.
Hi, I was wondering more to do with your directing career. A bit of breath of fresh air. Do you, you mentioned directing and trying to use like arts activism, and I was wondering, within the arts, I'm studying the arts, and ethics seems to be quite a bit of like a murky ground where through the use of the word art, or this is a piece of art, you can kind of push boundaries and go further. And I was wondering if you've kind of been struggling to try to see what is ethical, but also is kind of, I mean, with the environmental crisis, you kind of need to bash open people's heads a little bit and be like, look at this, but at the same time, ethically, it needs to be a bit. So have you been struggling with kind of seeing where is that ethical line of like, how much can I push with it still?
Do you mean the ethics of like the production of it, or you mean the ethics of what you're saying kind of thing?
So the ethics of like, arts can be very, it can push boundaries, and you can show a lot, and actually it's a debate we've been having of like, is it okay or is it not? Mm-hmm. So you can show something really graphic, or you can kind of push things quite far. And have you been thinking about like how much should you be pushing it and what should you be doing?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's probably like reflective of why I've chosen for this next piece something so genre specific. I think you know, it gives you some artistic license and freedom to kind of push the sort of topic you're trying to sort of crack open, but I'm not having to steep it in rigid facts and reality, because I'm using the genre of kind of a monster and a thriller kind of film to sort of play on reality. So whether or not that's like kind of escaping being kind of held at a point for the story, like it's maybe giving me too much freedom, I don't know. But I mean, yeah, there's ethics with anything. I think obviously it's how much you want to. Are you willing to like? Are you wanting to shock your audience, or are you wanting to empower them? Are you wanting to inspire them? I think for me, you know, I'm not wanting to like break the audience down and watch this movie and think, well, we could just I mean, there's no hope. I mean, that's not gonna like help anything. So I think for me, it's like, how do you play on that with that sort of boundary and that line of being honest and truthful and not holding back because you're trying to like paint an easier, more digestible picture of it, and how much you still wanting to empower the audience member and still make them feel like they matter as an individual in such a global topic. So it's definitely something that I'm kind of toying with and questioning all the time, and I'm sure I will always continue to. And that's what's fascinating about the process, because you know, you're always in process. It's always kind of a questioning and of what you're doing, or sometimes you push it too far and you're like, maybe no one really wants to listen to that story, or let's just like change the way we're telling that. Yeah, I think it's always a push and pull, and it never gets easier. And I don't think, and also by who's judge too. I think you have your own judge of what you think is okay and ethical, and then someone else has a completely different understanding of that. So at the end of the day, you have to make your films for yourself, or your art, or your painting, or photography, or your written word. You have to make it for what you understand as okay or as interesting, and I'm sure someone else will find it interesting too. I think you can often think that you finish a project and you think, is anyone going to want to watch this, or anyone going to want to enjoy it? And I think if you've enjoyed making it and you feel like there's truth in it, like someone else will see some truth in that too. And if you've made films with other people in the collaborative process, if they said yes and they wanted to come on board and be part of the story, that shows that someone else is going to be as well.
Fantastic. I think that's probably all we have time for now. Like, thank you so much, Bonnie, for doing this. I've really enjoyed this interview, and I hope everybody in the audience has really enjoyed it as well. I just wanted to ask, just while we leave, do you mind staying seated, just so we don't have like a massive crush to the door? And yeah, I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Please can we have a last round of applause for Bonnie?
Thank you. Thank you.
Rock and roll. All right.